Hey everybody, welcome to What the Fact, a weekly show that sorts out fact from fiction in your news feeds, among your politicians, and sometimes pundits. I'm Aaron Schrockman.
And I'm Katie Sanders. Aaron and I are editors with PolitiFact. PolitiFact is the largest fact-checking organization in the United States, and we're actually coming up on our 12th year of being a thing.
Yeah.
This is a really exciting year.
Not the
coming
show,
up on a
PolitiFact.
presidential election. Right, the show is not quite that old, but getting better and better every week. So this show normally takes you through the latest statements from the White House, the latest statements from Congress, but this show is going to be exclusively focused on some of the big issues that we are seeing in the 2020 campaign.
Yeah, I think a lot of things we hear from readers and viewers is that we kind of want to focus on some of the big hot button topics like immigration, gun control, race issues. So we're actually going to cover immigration, gun control, and race issues in this show. But with so many Democrats running, we want to make sure that you have some time to understand these issues from the perspective of the Democrats, to kind of understand what they're saying and whether or not what they're saying is true or not. All right, first up, it's immigration issues, and we're going to start with Julian Castro, who has made kind of decriminalizing border crossings a signature piece of his campaign. It came up several times during the most recent presidential debate in Miami. Take a look.
Some of the Democratic presidential candidates have been talking about decriminalizing crossing the border, including Julian Castro.
This is a law that was put into place in 1929 by a segregationist, by the way. But from 1929 till about 2004, it actually, even though it was on the books as a crime, it was mostly enforced as a civil violation.
Castro is talking about one particular section of federal immigration law. We'll look at whether his description of the law's origin and its enforcement is accurate. Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act says it's a crime to cross the U.S. border at any time or place other than as designated by immigration officers. The origin of that law dates back to 1929, when Congress first made it a misdemeanor to enter the U.S. without proper approval. It also made it a felony to illegally enter the U.S. after being deported. That law was spearheaded by Senator Coleman Livingston Blease, a man historians have described as an unrepentant white supremacist. Federal authorities did enforce the law in the criminal court system after it was passed. A 1930 report from the U.S. Attorney General's office cites the law as the reason for a stark increase in criminal immigration cases. And in the following decade, the federal government continued to prosecute thousands of people under that law every year. World War II halted that trend, and prosecutions for illegally crossing the border remained low until 2005. That's when then President George W. Bush launched Operation Streamline, an initiative that bumped up prosecutions of illegal entry along the southwest border. Before that policy change, people caught crossing the border illegally for the first time were typically referred to the civil immigration system, or they were released into the U.S. and told to return for a future court date. So the history books largely confirm Castro's statement that illegally crossing the border was mostly enforced as a civil violation until the mid-2000s.
All right, Katie, so the claim here from Julian Castro is that Section 1325 of U.S. immigration law, the piece of law that criminalizes border crossings, was, quote, put into place in 1929 by a segregationist. Is that right?
It's pretty right. Well, we wouldn't say it's literally accurate, but it's very close. So it gets our mostly true rating. And what's true about it is that the person who kind of engineered this idea in American immigration policy, that if you cross the southern border in particular, you should be charged with a crime and not just handled in a different way, was in fact a segregationist. His name was Coleman Livingston Blease of South Carolina. He was a Democrat at the time in the Senate, former governor. He had a lot of racist positions.
Yeah, he supported lynching.
Yeah.
He basically said he was an unrepentant white supremacist. He opposed white people paying taxes to educate black people. I mean, different time in our country.
That part certainly holds up. But the part about immigration policy is pretty interesting too. So he wasn't the first person to come up with an immigration policy that well, I should say that there were immigration policies at the time that were quite different. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act at the time, and this was a different approach. But experts told us his approach to criminalize crossings between ports of entry was really targeted at immigrants from Mexico in particular. The thing to know that doesn't make this totally true is that that particular piece of law was was no longer part of U.S. policy as of 1952, and that's because it was pretty much folded in to what is a lot closer to our current immigration policy, which became Section 1325.
Yeah, Blaise's Act is not formally cited as the source of that Section 1325, which criminalizes, again, crossing the border illegally, but it is considered the foundation of the policy, so that's why that's mostly true. Next up, we're going to go to Donald Trump, who obviously is making immigration a big part of his agenda as he seeks re-election in 2020. In a recent Telemundo interview, he talked about the crisis on the southern border and basically the child separation policy, and he said it wasn't my doing, it was Barack Obama's. Take a listen.
When I became president, President Obama had a separation policy. I didn't have it, he had it. I brought the families together.
All right, Katie, so Donald Trump has made this remark several times that the child separation policy wasn't his, that it was Barack Obama's. We've looked into this and we found it to be
inaccurate.
Okay.
So an inaccurate claim in our turf rates false. Donald Trump's really insisting that this is true by repeating it a lot. But since our fact-checking began around this issue, I think last year, we found that no, there was not a child separation policy that started in Obama's tenure. In fact, family separations were quite rare during the Obama years, and even during the George W. Bush years. We've talked to numerous immigration experts who have reinforced that point. Now, Donald Trump is saying he didn't have a child separation policy, but this was a very clear effect of his policy that he did initiate through Jeff Sessions, the former Attorney General, that had like a zero tolerance policy for people who were caught crossing the border. The switch really was all of these crossings would be criminally prosecuted, which resulted in children being separated from their families. Jose Diaz-Balart from Telemundo, I give him a lot of credit for trying to correct the president in real time. But the president just kept saying, it wasn't me. I inherited separation. I changed the plan. I brought people together. That is not accurate. There are still many people who are not put back together.
Also worth noting, he said he changed the plan and ended this, but actually he had previously argued that he couldn't, under executive action, do exactly what he ended up doing. Kind of a strange claim. We rated it false. All right, when we come back, we're going to turn our attention to gun issues, including a claim from Bernie Sanders, who has been accused of being sometimes cozy with the NRA and gun issues, and he's kind of fighting back against that characterization. We'll take a look at that claim when we come back.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to What the Fact, weekly show on fact-checking U.S. politics. I'm Katie, and this is Aaron. And it's time now to focus on another issue that's been very dominant in the Democratic presidential primary, guns.
Yeah, first up, Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York who's running for president, kind of in that second or third tier U.S. senator, trying to make a name for herself. She attacked Donald Trump over the issue of bump stocks. Remember, bump stocks were a part of the Las Vegas shooting at Mandalay Bay. And she basically said that Donald Trump had the opportunity and the public support to ban bump stocks, which converts a semi-automatic rifle into a fully automatic rifle. But Donald Trump took no action. She said that he had the opportunity and didn't do it. Is that true? We're going to find out right now.
During a town hall on Fox News, Senator and Democratic presidential candidate Kirsten Gillibrand took a swipe at President Donald Trump's record while answering questions about gun control.
After the shooting in Las Vegas, he said, yeah, we're going to ban the bump stocks. Did he ban the bump stocks? No, because the NRA came crashing down and said, don't you dare do any restrictions on our guns around this country.
But there's a big problem with that critique. The senator is just plain wrong. Bump stocks became a key point of contention after the Las Vegas shooting in October 2017. The gunman had a dozen weapons outfitted with the accessory that effectively turns a semi-automatic gun into a fully automatic one. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, President Trump did say he would look into a ban on bump stocks. 2 months later, his administration started the formal process to review regulations surrounding the devices. By December 2018, the rule became final, creating a new nationwide ban on bump stocks. That rule is currently facing legal challenges, but the ban is in effect while those lawsuits make their way through the court system. Our partners at PolitiFact reached out to Senator Gillibrand's team, who acknowledged that President Trump did indeed ban bump stocks. But her office seemed to defend her Fox News statement, pointing to the time that passed between the Las Vegas shooting and the ban going into effect. But that rationale doesn't make Gillibrand's false statement correct. She said President Trump didn't ban bump stocks, but he did.
Okay, Aaron, she's really misrepresenting the history of what happened. So how does it rate on our Truthometer?
Well, I wouldn't say misrepresenting, she's just flat wrong. So this gets our lowest rating, it's pants on fire. Really, this is an accomplishment that I think the Trump administration can point to. Despite opposition from the NRA, bump stocks are now illegal, and to possess a bump stock is now a felony. And so this is something that Trump and the White House accomplished. It's unclear why Gillibrand suggested that they didn't, but it is illegal. So pants on fire. It's totally the way to look at this. All right, another Democrat who's in an interesting position on gun issues is Bernie Sanders. Comes from Vermont, a very kind of libertarian type state. Bernie Sanders is actually an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. He's been taken to task many times by Democrats over some of his votes on guns. And this came up again during the first presidential debate in some back and forth between him and Rachel Maddow of MSNBC. We're going to fact check one of those claims, but take a listen first.
Senator Sanders, a Vermont newspaper recently released portions of an interview you gave in 2013 in which you said, quote, "My own view on guns is everything being equal, states should make those decisions."
No.
Has your thinking changed since then? Do you now think there's a federal role to play?
That's a mischaracterization of my thinking.
It's a
Look,
quote of
we
you.
have a gun.
All right, Katie, so the claim here is that essentially Bernie's record on guns has been mischaracterized, right?
Or particularly that he believes states should regulate this issue. And he thinks Maddow misrepresented the comments that he made to this alternative weekly. We're going to get into that. But first, a word about what makes Senator Bernie Sanders' record on guns so confusing. Back in the 90s, he took two votes in particular that seemed contradictory that would have expanded or limited guns excess, right? They would have expanded restrictions. So this came up a lot back in 2016. This was a popular line of attack. Bernie Sanders voted against the Brady bill, which would have required background checks and imposed a 5-day waiting period for handgun purchases. And that made him pretty much an outlier. But just a little bit later, I think it was only 6 months, he voted in favor of a ban on assault weapons. So this made his gun position, to put it simply, very hard to kind of suss out. And his comments have muddied the waters as well.
Yeah, this has dogged him for a long time, but the reality is since 2013, he's very much more gotten in line with kind of the Democrat position on guns. He voted in favor of limiting magazine ammunition capacity, background checks for online sales, and was actually a co-sponsor of a plan that would make states work with the U.S. Attorney General to create a firearm purchase registry. So he has kind of gotten more in position with Democrats. Now, as far as the issue of kind of these quotes, what do we find out?
Well, basically, he did say what he said, as Maddow said. He said, he voted against the Brady bill because it was a decision for the states to make. He references a lot that Vermont is a rural state where people do own guns, but they do have a low crime rate as well, so it hasn't really been an issue for him. But what he's getting at in that particular interview from a little bit ago is that immediately after he made that comment about state regulation, he mentioned that Congress was looking at mandating increased background checks and banning straw purchases, and he said those federal policies would make sense. So he said there is room for the federal government to go beyond what states should do, and that's why we rated his claim that Maddow represented his position and his comments mostly true.
Right, convoluted one. Read it on PolitiFact.com. When we come back, we're going to take it and have interesting discussion about race issues, in particular a back and forth between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Stay with us. All All right, everybody, welcome back to What the Fact. I'm Aaron, this is Katie, and now it's time for a segment looking at race issues, a trio of claims from Democrats running for president this year. Katie, where are we going first?
So first, we're going to talk about that debate later in this segment because race was a huge issue that came up in the Democratic debate that we just had. Another one's coming. I'm sure we'll hear more about race at the second set of debates in Detroit coming up. But this actually happened after the debate. South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg was on the campaign trail, and he was confronted about what he found as a racist remark to explain disparities in the criminal justice system. And we took a look at what Buttigieg actually responded with, which sounded like a pretty striking statistic, but not a completely accurate one. Newsy's going to walk us through it.
While taking questions during a campaign stop, Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg pushed back against a man who made a racist comment.
The fact that a black person is 4 times as likely as a white person to be incarcerated for the exact same crime is evidence of systemic racism.
That's a sweeping statistic, and it looks like his overly broad language resulted in a statement that doesn't have the data to back it up. Buttigieg's campaign told our partners at PolitiFact his comment came from a study published by the ACLU in 2013. That study has the ratio Buttigieg mentioned. A black person is 4 times as likely as a white person, but it's talking about arrests, not incarceration. And the study is focused solely on marijuana, whereas Buttigieg just said the exact same crime. There are numerous studies and articles about the racial disparity in the American criminal justice system, but none of the ones we examined are a perfect fit to back up the South Bend mayor's statement. Some focus on young people or teens, but Buttigieg didn't specify an age range. Some look at arrests or detentions, but he specifically said incarceration. Others look at specific crimes or categories of crime, but Buttigieg just said crime in general. The executive director of the Sentencing Project told PolitiFact, "It's encouraging that Buttigieg is calling attention to this important issue, but he should be framing the research findings more accurately."
All right, Katie, so the claim here is that a black person is 4 times as likely as a white person to be incarcerated for the exact same crime. What did we find?
Well, I think that this has a ring of truth to it. There are simply a lot of studies and different, lot of evidence to point to clear disparity in the criminal justice system. But Buttigieg's specific claim, and words really matter here at PolitiFact, is not accurate. We searched high and low, talked to multiple criminal justice experts. Where could this be coming from? But what we found, and what the Buttigieg campaign actually confirmed, is that he was trying to refer to a 2013 study from the ACLU. It didn't look at all crimes, and it didn't look at incarceration. It looked at arrest for the single crime of marijuana possession, and it found that a black person would be 4 times more likely to be arrested than a white person. So what Buttigieg did in the heat of the moment was to apply that to kind of an all crimes kind of average for incarceration too, which is more serious. But so we rated this claim mostly false because while there's that element of truth and clear disparities, the literal words of this claim are not accurate.
All right. Next up, we're gonna go to this back and forth now between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. It really was the center focal point of the first presidential debates in Miami. First, we're gonna take a look at a claim from Kamala Harris, who was talking about being part of the second class to integrate in Berkeley, California. Take a listen.
There was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
All right, Katie, so Kamala Harris there was talking about Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark 1954 Supreme Court case that basically said that racial segregation in public schools in the United States was unconstitutional. And then she was making the claim that she was part of this second class to integrate. Now, a lot of conservatives kind of later came back and said, no, this was false. But in reality, our research says that it's basically right.
Yeah, so it got a mostly true claim. I think she could have been more precise in what exactly she was referring to, but she wasn't espousing inaccurate information. So she was actually 3 when Berkeley Unified School Board voted back in 1968 to desegregate the elementary schools. So that part of her storytelling checks out. And we actually confirmed that with the school district itself, who they said she was absolutely accurate in her claim. She attended this school called Thousand Oaks Elementary School, which is on the city's north side. But her statement could have used a bit of clarification, which is why we rated it mostly true, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is she was integrated in Berkeley's high school, but really that started years before busing. And it wasn't because of busing, it was because in Berkeley, the high school was racially diverse because it was the only comprehensive public high school in the city, so it basically had to draw citizens from all backgrounds.
All right, so now let's look at the other side, kind of the flip of this debate on busing that came up during the Democratic debate, and this was Joe Biden. Former vice president, former senator, was challenged by Harris to defend his record on this issue. And Biden came out very strongly in saying he didn't oppose busing. Let's listen carefully to what he said.
Vice President Biden, do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No.
Do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Okay, Aaron, so Joe Biden tried to say he did not oppose busing. He opposed a particular kind of busing required by the U.S. Education Department. But experts told us, and we spoke to many, that didn't really make logical sense. So where does that leave Biden's claim on the Truthometer?
Yeah, we rated this claim mostly false as well, so basically it's fairly inaccurate. Joe Biden was elected to the Senate in Delaware and basically took a position that was opposed to federal busing. He believed it didn't work, it wouldn't work. And so he did argue that this was something of a local issue. So you can, from his perspective, he's looking and saying, I opposed mandated busing by the Department of Education. But by doing so, he knew then, and many still know today, that he basically was allowing states, particularly in the South, particularly where people said this was most needed, to not do busing, right? He was saying this is a state or local issue. And the reality is, by kind of passing it to places, he knew what the outcome would be. Biden himself, again, thought that busing actually wouldn't work. And maybe to many people, history might show that he was right. It really wasn't popular also among African Americans who thought that they were losing the fabric of their culture by being kind of forced to integrate into schools. There's a number of different votes. The Biden campaign will point to some votes where it suggests that he kind of supported busing type programs. But on the overall measure, I think it's clear to us and clear to experts that he generally opposed busing as a practice. And by punting it to state and local officials, he was essentially saying, I know what would happen, because he did, particularly in the South.
Yeah, so this has come up from other progressive critics of Biden's record, and we've looked at it several times now. And so the point we always try to acknowledge is that it wasn't that Biden opposed desegregation overall, which I think has been conflated in other claims we've looked at. He ran on a platform of integration, but once he started getting that local blowback from parents in Wilmington, where busing was being required, that's when he started supporting more anti-busing legislation. So I think you made a great point about what the practical, logical effects of some of his votes actually was, and he knew that at the time. But no, he wasn't opposed to desegregation overall. So Biden's claim here rates mostly false.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of What the Fact. Until next week, I'm Aaron, and this is Katie. Take care.